After years of being deaf, I recovered my hearing but didn't tell my family right away. Well, let's go back to where it all started. My name is Lily Kemp and I'm 28 years old. For the past 15 years, I've lived in complete silence after a car accident left me profoundly deaf. But 3 months ago, everything changed in ways I never could have imagined. I was sitting in Dr. Roosevelt's office, staring at the cochlear implant activation device. My palms were sweaty, heart racing like I'd run a marathon. "Are you ready, Lily?" she asked, her lips moving in the familiar pattern I'd learned to read perfectly. The moment she flipped the switch, the world exploded. Not with sound exactly, but with something I hadn't experienced since I was 13. First came the mechanical hum of the air conditioning, then the scratch of her pen on paper, and finally her voice. "Can you hear me?" I burst into tears. 15 years of silence had ended in an instant, but I couldn't speak. The overwhelming flood of sounds, footsteps in the hallway, cars outside, even my own breathing, left me paralyzed with emotion. "Take your time," Dr. Roosevelt said gently. "This is completely normal." But as I sat there processing this miracle, a darker thought crept in. My family had no idea I was even trying experimental treatments. They'd written me off years ago, especially after what happened with the inheritance. Maybe it was time I learned exactly what they really thought of their deaf burden. The revenge I hadn't known I wanted was about to begin. The memories flooded back as I walked home that day, sounds still overwhelming my newly awakened ears. I was 13 when the drunk driver ran that red light. My parents, Benjamin and Catherine, were devastated initially. But devastation turns to frustration, and frustration turns to something much darker. "She'll never be normal again," I remembered my mother saying to my father when she thought I was sleeping. I was learning to lip read then, becoming an expert at reading conversations from doorways and around corners. My younger brother Elijah was only 8 when I lost my hearing. He adapted better than anyone, learning sign language with me, creating our own secret codes. He was my lifeline in those early years. But as I got older, things changed. Family dinners became exercises in exclusion. They'd talk around me, over me, about me, but rarely to me. When they did acknowledge me, it was with exaggerated gestures and slow, patronizing speech, as if deafness had somehow affected my intelligence. "Can you help Lily understand?" became my mother's favorite phrase when explaining anything important. Bills, family decisions, even what we were having for dinner. Everything filtered through someone else because direct communication was apparently too much trouble. The hearing aids I tried never worked well enough. The family began treating me like an expensive obligation. I saw it in their faces during those awkward holiday gatherings, the way relatives would nod sympathetically and then quickly change the subject. I learned to navigate the world independently, but my family never noticed. They were too busy managing their burden. 3 years ago, everything came to a head when Grandma Rose passed away. She'd always been my champion, the one person who learned sign language fluently and treated me like her hearing grandchildren. Her house was my sanctuary. I'll never forget sitting in that lawyer's office, watching everyone's faces as the will was read. Grandma Rose had left me her house, the beautiful Victorian where I'd spent countless afternoons learning to bake and reading her extensive library. "There must be some mistake," my mother said immediately. "How can she maintain a house? She can't even answer the phone." My father was already calculating. "We'll need to sell it and put the money in a trust for her care." Elijah, now 23, said nothing. He just stared at his hands. But the lawyer was clear. Rose Kemp was very specific. "The house goes to Lily, along with instructions that it not be sold unless Lily herself makes that decision." I watched my parents exchange glances, the kind that spoke volumes. They were furious. Not sad about Grandma Rose, not happy for me, but angry that their disabled daughter had inherited something valuable that they couldn't control. "She can't handle this responsibility," my mother insisted. "We should contest this." That night, I moved into Grandma Rose's house. It was the first time I'd felt truly independent, truly free. But I also felt completely alone. I had no idea how much more alone I was about to become. Living in Grandma Rose's house should have been paradise. For the first time in my adult life, I had space, independence, and peace. But my family's resentment grew like a cancer. They started showing up unannounced, always with some concern about my ability to maintain the property. My mother would walk through the rooms, pointing out imaginary problems. "That window looks loose. The electrical seems outdated. Are you sure you can handle all this? My father was more direct. You know, Lily, we could sell this place and get you a nice accessible apartment. Something more appropriate. But it was Elijah who broke my heart completely. One evening, 6 months after I'd moved in, I was in the kitchen when I saw him and our parents in the living room. They thought I was upstairs and they weren't facing my direction. I crept closer and positioned myself where I could read their lips clearly. She's being stubborn about this, my father was saying. The house is wasted on her. We could have her declared incompetent, my mother suggested. She can't drive, she can't work a normal job. No judge would think she can handle property ownership. But Elijah's response shattered me. My sweet little brother, the one who'd learned sign language for me, looked up and said, maybe we should just wait it out. She's never going to get married or have kids. When something happens to her, the house will come to me anyway as next of kin. They were planning my life like I was already dead. I stood in that doorway, invisible to the people who were supposed to love me, and realized I was truly alone. After overhearing that conversation, I threw myself into research. If my family saw me as helpless, I'd prove them wrong. I started investigating every possible treatment for hearing loss, no matter how experimental or expensive. That's when I found Dr. Roosevelt and her revolutionary cochlear implant program. The technology was cutting edge, combining traditional implants with new neural stimulation techniques. The success rates were promising, but it wasn't covered by insurance and cost nearly $40,000. I had the money from Grandma Rose's savings account, money my family assumed I was wasting on house maintenance. Instead, I was investing in something they thought was impossible: my independence. The consultations took months. Medical tests, psychological evaluations, surgical planning. Through it all, I told no one. I took the bus to appointments, used ride-sharing when necessary, and paid in cash to avoid any paper trail my family might discover. Dr. Roosevelt was amazed by my determination. Most patients bring family support, she noted during one visit. I smiled grimly and signed, my family thinks I'm broken beyond repair. I'm going to prove them wrong. The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I told my family I was visiting a friend out of town for the week. Elijah offered to drive me, probably hoping to check up on my story, but I declined. As I went under anesthesia, my last thought was wondering what my family's voices actually sounded like after all these years. The 3 months following my surgery were surreal. I had to relearn how to process sound while pretending to still be deaf around my family. It was exhausting but oddly empowering. Simple sounds amazed me. The whistle of the kettle, rain on the windows, my own footsteps on hardwood floors. But human voices were the most shocking. Everyone sounded different than I'd imagined. My mother's voice was sharper than expected, with a nasal quality that matched her personality perfectly. My father's voice was deeper but weak, like he was always slightly out of breath. And Elijah's voice was smooth and confident, which somehow made his betrayal feel even worse. I practiced responding naturally, making sure my reactions matched what they expected from me. When they spoke directly to me, I still relied primarily on lip reading and responded in sign language. But when they thought I wasn't paying attention, I was recording every word. The house became my laboratory. I learned the rhythm of their visits, their habits, their conversations. They had no idea that their deaf sister was listening to every whispered plot, every casual insult, every plan they made for my future. They talked about me like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. But the worst was yet to come. I was about to discover just how deep their deception ran. 2 weeks ago, I was in the kitchen making lunch when my mother called Elijah. He was in the living room, speaking quietly, but my newly enhanced hearing picked up every word. The lawyer called back. Elijah said. He confirmed that there's no way to contest the will directly. Grandma Rose's instructions were too specific. My blood ran cold. They were still trying to take my house. But my mother's voice came through the phone speaker. But he said if we could prove she's not capable of maintaining the property or managing her affairs, we might have grounds for guardianship. I dropped my spoon. Guardianship meant they could make all my decisions, where I lived, how I spent my money, everything. How do we prove that? My mother asked. Elijah's voice became calculating. We document everything. Take pictures of any maintenance issues. Keep records of bills she might miss. Maybe even. He paused. Create some problems. What do you mean? Nothing illegal. Just situations that show she can't handle property ownership. A burst pipe she doesn't notice because she can't hear the water. A security issue because she can't hear break-ins. Things like that. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then, do what you need to do. That house should have gone to you anyway. Rose always favored her because of her condition. My condition. Like my deafness was a character flaw rather than the result of some drunk stranger's terrible choices. They weren't just planning to steal my inheritance. They were planning to sabotage me to do it. Over the next week, I watched my family's plan unfold with horrifying clarity. Elijah started visiting more frequently, always with his phone out, always finding new problems with the house. "Lily, did you know the basement smells like gas?" he asked one afternoon, his face full of fake concern. I hadn't smelled anything, but I dutifully followed him downstairs. He'd clearly been down there earlier. I could hear him moving around while I was supposedly napping upstairs. "I don't smell anything unusual," I signed. "That's the problem," he said, speaking aloud while signing. "You might not notice these safety issues because of your hearing." He took pictures of the furnace, the gas line, everything. I realized he was building a case that I was too disabled to notice dangerous situations. My parents started dropping by to check on me almost daily. Each visit included comments about my limitations and photos of anything that could be construed as neglect or inability to maintain the property. "The gutters are full of leaves," my father observed, camera ready. "Have you been able to arrange for maintenance?" I had, of course. I'd hired a service that came monthly. But they'd come the day before a big storm, so some leaves had already accumulated again. "Look at these windows," my mother said, photographing water spots that were barely visible. "They're not being properly maintained." They were creating a narrative. Poor, disabled Lily couldn't take care of herself or her property. She needed family intervention for her own good. But they had no idea I was documenting their behavior too. Last Tuesday morning, I woke up to the sound of water dripping. Not a gentle drip, but a steady flow somewhere in the house. I followed the sound to the bathroom and found water pouring from under the sink. At first I panicked. This was exactly the kind of emergency my family claimed I couldn't handle. But as I got closer to inspect the damage, I noticed something strange. The pipe hadn't burst naturally. The connection had been deliberately loosened, just enough to create a slow leak that would build over time. Someone had sabotaged my plumbing. I heard a key in the front door. Elijah's voice called out, "Lily." I brought coffee. He'd let himself in using the spare key I'd given him for emergencies. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Oh no," he said, appearing in the bathroom doorway. "What happened here?" I watched his face carefully. He was good at acting surprised, but I caught the brief flicker of satisfaction before he composed himself into concern. "We need to call a plumber right away," he said, already pulling out his phone. "This could cause serious damage." But instead of calling a plumber, I heard him dial my parents. "You need to get over here," he said. "Lily's had a major plumbing emergency. She didn't even notice the leak until it was serious." That was a lie. I'd found it within hours of it starting. As I stood there watching my brother orchestrate this performance, something inside me snapped. They wanted to play games? Fine. I could play games too. But my games would be much more interesting. That afternoon, while my family fussed over the emergency plumbing situation, I made a decision. I set up voice recording apps on my phone and started documenting every conversation, every concerned comment, every manipulation. "She could have had serious water damage," my mother was saying to the plumber Elijah had called. "She doesn't always notice these things right away." The plumber, a kind older man named Frank, looked puzzled. "Actually, ma'am, this leak was caught pretty early. If she'd let it go much longer, then you'd have damage. But she called it in fast." I watched my mother's face tighten. That wasn't the narrative she wanted. Over the next few days, I recorded everything. Elijah admitting to my father that he'd checked the pipe connection during his last visit. My mother discussing with her sister how they needed to do something about my situation before I got hurt. But the most damning recording came yesterday. I was upstairs when Elijah and my parents gathered in the living room. They thought I was taking a nap, but I was listening from the top of the stairs with my phone recording. "The plumbing thing didn't work like we hoped," Elijah said. "Frank said she caught it early, made her look responsible. We need something bigger," my father said. Something that clearly shows she can't manage. My mother's voice was cold. What about her medications? She takes those anxiety pills. What if she had some kind of incident? What do you mean? Elijah asked. I mean, what if she took too many by mistake? Someone with hearing loss might miss their alarm, double dose accidentally. That would definitely show she needs supervised care. They were discussing drugging me. My own family was planning to poison me to steal my house. This morning I made my decision. I called Elijah and asked him to bring our parents over for lunch. I want to discuss something important with all of you, I told him via text. They arrived within an hour, probably hoping I was ready to admit I couldn't handle the house. They had no idea what was actually coming. I served sandwiches and lemonade, playing the perfect deaf host. They made their usual small talk around me, occasionally signing something simple in my direction. Then I walked to the living room and turned to face them all. I have something to tell you, I said out loud. They all looked confused. I rarely spoke aloud anymore, preferring sign language. 3 months ago I had cochlear implant surgery, I continued, speaking clearly. I've been able to hear perfectly for weeks now. The silence in the room was deafening. Elijah's sandwich dropped from his hand. My parents stared at me like I'd grown a second head. That's impossible, my mother whispered. Is it? I pulled out my phone and pressed play on one of my recordings. Elijah's voice filled the room. Maybe we should just wait it out. She's never going to get married or have kids. When something happens to her, the house will come to me anyway as next of kin. My father went pale. Lily, let me explain. Explain what? I interrupted, playing another recording. His own voice discussing creating problems, to prove I was incompetent. You've been planning to steal my house, sabotage my property, and now you want to drug me into supervised care, I said calmly. Elijah stood up. You don't understand the context. Don't I? I played the final recording. My mother's voice suggesting they make me overdose on my anxiety medication. The room fell silent except for the sound of 3 people realizing their world was about to change forever. You recorded us, my mother said, her voice shaking with rage rather than shame. That's illegal. Actually, it's not, I replied calmly. This is a one-party consent state. I can record any conversation I'm part of. And since you all thought I couldn't hear, you included me in quite a few conversations. Elijah tried a different approach. Lily, we were just worried about you. We love you. Love. I laughed, a sound I'd forgotten I could make. You loosened my plumbing to create an emergency. You've been plotting to have me declared incompetent. You discussed poisoning me. That's not love, Elijah. That's abuse. My father found his voice. What do you want from us? I want you to leave, I said simply. I want you to take your spare keys, your fake concern, and your schemes, and I want you out of my house and out of my life. We're your family, my mother protested. No, I replied. Family doesn't plot to destroy each other for money. Family doesn't see disability as weakness to exploit. Family doesn't treat their daughter like a burden to be managed. I walked to the front door and opened it. I've changed all the locks. I've filed reports with Adult Protective Services about your sabotage attempts. And I've sent copies of these recordings to a lawyer. Elijah's face went white. You're bluffing. Try me, I said. Test whether I'm still the helpless deaf girl you've been manipulating. Because that girl is gone. They left in silence, probably still processing that their victim had been listening to every cruel word for months. As I closed the door behind them, I heard my own voice clearly for the first time in 15 years. I am not your victim anymore. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my beautiful living room, listening to jazz music and planning my future. The cochlear implant has opened up a world I thought I'd lost forever. But more importantly, removing my toxic family from my life has given me something even more valuable. Peace. The legal case resolved quickly once my lawyer presented the recordings. Elijah's sabotage attempts and my parents' conspiracy to have me declared incompetent were clear violations of elder abuse laws. They agreed to a restraining order and to cover all my legal fees in exchange for me not pressing criminal charges. I've started a blog about navigating the world with hearing disabilities, sharing both the practical challenges and the unexpected gifts of my experience. Turns out, 15 years of silence taught me to observe human behavior in ways most people never learn. Dr. Roosevelt says I'm her star patient. My hearing continues to improve, and I've become an advocate for her program, helping other patients understand that disability doesn't mean helplessness. Last week, I got a text from Elijah. "I'm sorry. We were wrong about everything." I deleted it without responding. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Some family bonds aren't worth preserving when they were built on manipulation and greed rather than love. But I'm not bitter. I'm grateful. Grateful for Grandma Rose, who saw my worth when my own parents couldn't. Grateful for 15 years of silence that taught me to value real communication. And grateful for the opportunity to reclaim not just my hearing but my voice. Today I'm meeting with a realtor. Not to sell the house but to buy the property next door. I'm turning this neighborhood into my forever home. And everyone who lives here will know. I hear everything. Sometimes I wonder if I should have just kept the peace and given in. But then I remember what they said and did, and I get angry all over again. What would you have done in my situation? Did I make the right call?